April 9, 2026. Strait of Hormuz. 0340 hours. The USS Gerald R. Ford, hull designation CVN-78, is holding position 140 nautical miles southeast of Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary naval base on the Persian Gulf coast. She is the most expensive warship ever constructed by human civilization. Her total program cost now exceeding $13.3 billion. At this moment, she is conducting sustained flight operations in darkness. At her electromagnetic aircraft launch system, cycling FA-18E Super Hornets off her 4 catapults at intervals that compress time into pure kinetic energy. The Persian Gulf narrows here. The strait itself is only 21 miles wide at its tightest choke point. The Ford cannot maneuver like she would in the open Atlantic. She is constrained by geography, visible to satellite, and her radar cross-section is the size of a small city. In the operations centers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, in Bandar Abbas, and on the islands of Abu Musa and the Greater and Lesser Tunbs, officers are watching her on their screens. They have been watching her since she entered the region. Their analysts have computed her position, her course, her speed, and they have cross-referenced that data against their inventory of ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, fast attack craft, submarine assets, and the network of coastal defense batteries that ring the Persian Gulf like a tightening fist. Iranian strategic doctrine, directly descended from the mosaic defense concept developed by the IRGCN over 2 decades, is built around exactly this scenario. A large, expensive American naval asset operating in a constrained geography against a layered swarm of asymmetric threats. To the officers in Bandar Abbas tonight, the math appears to favor Iran. They believe they see a window. They are making a catastrophic error in arithmetic. Today on Navy Dissected, we dissect exactly why challenging the Ford in this theater isn't a military option. It's a suicide note written in missile exhaust. Let's begin where the Iranian analysts begin, because intellectual honesty demands that we take their assessment seriously before we dismantle it. The IRGCN's threat calculus isn't built on wishful thinking. It's built on documented capability, historical precedent, and a strategic concept that has been refined through decades of study of American naval operations in this exact body of water. Their confidence is not irrational. It is, however, fatally incomplete. To understand why, you have to understand what they believe they have. The primary anti-ship ballistic missile asset in Iran's Persian Gulf inventory is the Khalij Fars, which translates from Farsi as Persian Gulf. It's a domestically produced anti-ship ballistic missile publicly unveiled in 2011 and demonstrated in live-fire exercises in 2014 when Iranian forces struck a retired decommissioned vessel with claimed precision. The Khalij Fars is derived from the Fateh 110 short-range ballistic missile family and is assessed by Western intelligence agencies to carry a 650-kilogram warhead with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, sometimes abbreviated as MARV, designed specifically to defeat ship-based missile defense systems by performing terminal evasive maneuvers during final approach. Its published range is approximately 300 kilometers, roughly 186 miles. The Ford is operating at 140 nautical miles, which converts to approximately 161 statute miles or 259 kilometers from Bandar Abbas. Do the math. 300 kilometers of range minus 259 kilometers of separation equals 41 kilometers of margin. The Ford is not outside the threat envelope. She is well inside it. The Iranians know this number precisely. They have rehearsed this shot in simulation hundreds of times. But the Khalij Fars isn't Iran's only card. The Noor anti-ship cruise missile, an Iranian reverse-engineered and domestically produced variant of the Chinese C-802, NATO codename CSSN-8 Saqqadeh, represents the medium-range layer of Iran's anti-ship capability. The Noor has a published range of 170 kilometers, approximately 106 miles, and carries a 165-kilogram warhead. It flies at low altitude, sea skimming at between 5 and 10 meters above the wave surface, presenting a minimal radar cross-section that makes acquisition by surface ship radar extremely difficult beyond approximately 25 to 30 miles due to Earth's curvature creating a radar shadow at low altitudes. The Iranian Navy has deployed these systems on coastal defense batteries, on fast attack craft, and reportedly on modified container vessels that can close to within firing range before revealing themselves. The 2006 strike on the Israeli corvette INS Hanit by Hezbollah. Forces using a variant of this same missile family, a strike that successfully penetrated the ship's active defense systems because those systems had been partially deactivated, is studied obsessively in IRGCN doctrine centers. The lesson they extracted was not that the missile worked. The lesson they extracted was that defense systems have human operators, and human operators make mistakes under saturation pressure. That brings us to the third and most strategically significant element of the Iranian threat concept: saturation tactics. Iranian doctrine does not envision a single clean shot at the Ford. It envisions a coordinated, multi-axis, multi-domain swarm attack designed to overwhelm the finite capacity of any defensive system through sheer volume. The concept involves simultaneous launches of ballistic missiles on high-arc trajectories from land-based batteries on the Iranian coast, cruise missiles fired from fast attack craft and coastal defense batteries at sea-skimming altitude from multiple bearings simultaneously, and waves of armed unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, approaching at low altitude from different vectors to complicate the defensive engagement geometry. The theory is elegant in its brutality. And every defensive system has a magazine. Every magazine has a finite number of interceptors. Every fire control system has a maximum number of simultaneous engagements it can manage. If you flood the zone with more threats than interceptors and more simultaneous engagements than the fire control computer can queue, something gets through. Statistically, mathematically, inevitably, something gets through. To make this more concrete, but consider the cost asymmetry that Iran's strategists have spent years documenting. A Khalij-Fars ballistic missile costs Iran an estimated $2 to $3 million to produce. An SM-3 Block YB interceptor, the primary exoatmospheric kill vehicle in the Ford strike group's defensive inventory, costs the United States approximately $12.5 million per round. That's a 4-to-1 cost disadvantage for the defender on a single intercept exchange. Scale that across a saturation attack of 20 missiles requiring 20 SM-3 intercepts, and Iran has spent $40 to $60 million to force the United States to expend $250 million in interceptors. And that's assuming perfect intercept performance, which no defensive system in history has achieved under combat conditions. The economic logic of attrition warfare has rarely looked so favorable to the attacker. Iranian planners have presented these numbers in their strategic documents, which Western intelligence agencies have obtained and analyzed. They are proud of the math. They have run it 1,000 times. They believe it is definitive. Add the geographic constraints of the Persian Gulf itself. The Gulf is 615 miles long and averages 150 miles in width, but narrows dramatically at both ends. The Strait of Hormuz in the southeast and the Shat al-Arab waterway approach in the northwest are natural choke points that compress a carrier's maneuvering room to a degree that has no equivalent in open ocean naval warfare. The Ford cannot sprint to sea room. She cannot increase her range from Iranian threats by simply sailing east. The geography is a strategic lever that Iran has built its entire naval doctrine around. On paper, in the Persian Gulf, with Iranian missile batteries on 3 sides and a narrow exit channel covered by coastal defense systems, the geometry appears to favor the attacker. The IRGCN analysts who have spent careers studying this have every reason to feel confident. On paper, this looks like checkmate. The problem is that they've been playing against last decade's chessboard. The pieces have changed. before a single Iranian launch crew receives final authorization to fire, before the first key is turned in any hardened bunker along the Persian Gulf coast, an invisible campaign has already been running for weeks that has fundamentally degraded Iran's ability to execute the doctrine they've spent 2 decades developing. And it begins not with missiles or aircraft, but with electrons, with the manipulation of electromagnetic energy at the speed of light across a spectrum of frequencies that the human eye cannot see, the human ear cannot hear, and the human nervous system cannot detect without specialized equipment. It begins with what the U.S. Navy calls the electromagnetic maneuver warfare concept, and it is, in every meaningful operational sense, the first battle of this conflict fought and won before the first shot is declared. The Ford's Carrier Air Wing 8, CVW-8, includes an electronic attack squadron equipped with the EA-18G Growler, the most capable airborne electronic warfare platform currently in operational service with any military on Earth. The Growler is not a combat aircraft in the traditional sense. It carries no air-to-air missiles for offensive engagements. What it carries instead is the ALQ-249. Next-Generation Jammer Midband, NGJ-MB on subsequent reference, a system so different from its predecessors that comparing it to older jamming technology is like comparing a laser scalpel to a medieval broadsword. Before any Iranian radar operator paints the Ford with a targeting solution, Growlers from CVW-8 have been flying designated patrol patterns at altitudes between 25,000 and 35,000 feet for continuous 12-hour rotations, cycling between aircraft to maintain unbroken electronic warfare coverage over the entire Persian Gulf operating area. Here is the physics that transforms this from an electronic nuisance into a strategic weapon. Iranian coastal defense radars, whether the domestic Seper long-range surveillance radar, the Ghadir phased array system, or the older Chinese-derived systems still operational at secondary sites, all function on the same fundamental electromagnetic principle. They transmit a radio frequency pulse outward, wait for that pulse to reflect off a target and return, and measure the time delay between transmission and reception to calculate range, the frequency shift to calculate velocity, and the return signal intensity to estimate target size. The entire targeting system, the missile's guidance, the fire control computer's solution, the operator's confidence that he's locked onto the right target, depends on the integrity of that reflected pulse. If the reflected pulse is corrupted, everything built on top of it is fiction. The NGJ-MB corrupts it, but not through brute force. The old approach to electronic jamming was to transmit such high-power noise across a broad frequency range that the radar receiver was overwhelmed, like trying to hear a whisper in a room where every speaker is blasting static at maximum volume. That approach worked against 1970s and 1980s radar systems that operated on fixed, predictable frequencies. Modern Iranian radar systems, particularly the Seper, use frequency-agile technology that can hop between thousands of frequency channels per second, staying one jump ahead of a noise jammer trying to cover the whole spectrum. Brute force jamming against a frequency-hopping radar is like trying to block every exit from a building simultaneously with one person. It doesn't work. The NGJ-MB doesn't try to block every frequency. It listens first. Its gallium nitride receiver architecture captures the radar's transmitted pulse in microseconds. It identifies the specific frequency channel it's using, analyzes the pulse's modulation signature, and then, before the radar's own pulse has completed its round trip to the target and back, retransmits a mathematically crafted false return on that exact frequency channel that arrives at the radar receiver precisely when the genuine return would have arrived. The radar cannot distinguish the false return from a real one, because the false return has been constructed to be electromagnetically indistinguishable from a genuine reflection. It has the right frequency, it has the right amplitude, it has the right modulation, it has the right timing. Everything about it says, this is your target, here, at this range, at this bearing. Except it isn't. The Iranian radar operator watching his screen sees the Ford at a specific position. His fire control system is generating a targeting solution. His confidence indicator is showing a solid lock. Everything his training tells him to look for in a valid target designation is present, but the position his system shows is wrong. The range gate pull-off technique embedded in the NGJ-MB has been systematically walking the apparent target position away from the Ford's actual location by incremental steps, a few hundred meters per radar scan. Too gradual for automatic tracking algorithms to flag as anomalous, but accumulating over multiple scans into a targeting error of several kilometers. When the Iranian fire control computer has built what it believes is a precise missile guidance solution, the solution it has built points to empty water. The Ford is elsewhere. Not dramatically elsewhere, not obviously elsewhere, just quietly, mathematically elsewhere, by exactly the margin required to guarantee a miss. The Iranian radar operator doesn't know this. His situational awareness is intact, or so every indicator on his console tells him. He has a lock, he has a solution, he has confidence. What he actually has is a carefully manufactured illusion constructed by a 28-year-old electronic warfare officer sitting in the back seat of a Growler 15 miles away, who has been trained for 3,000 flight hours specifically for this scenario, and who is, at this precise moment, managing 7 simultaneous deception tracks against 7 different Iranian radar systems spread across 400 miles of Persian Gulf coastline. Not 6 systems, not 8 systems, exactly 7, each receiving a customized false return profile calibrated to the specific radar type and its known tracking algorithms. The Iranian Coastal Defense Network believes it has full situational awareness. It has a perfect, seamless, technically convincing picture of where the Ford is. Every data point checks out, and every data point is wrong. This isn't electronic warfare. This is the architecture of deception built at the speed of light, and the enemy has already lost the battle they don't know has started. But suppose, through some combination of backup passive infrared tracking systems, redundant optical sensors, or the fundamental electromagnetic signature of a nuclear-powered ship's wake and propulsion radiation. The Iranian targeting network has managed to develop a targeting solution that partially survives the Growler's deception. Suppose the IRGCN commander receives targeting data that his staff assesses as having 60% confidence. Not perfect, not ideal, but above the threshold at which Iranian doctrine authorizes a salvo launch on the principle that quantity compensates for targeting imprecision. The launch order is given. Multiple College Far's anti-ship ballistic missiles ignite their solid fuel boosters simultaneously at coastal facilities around Bandar Abbas, Jask, and Keshem Island. Their thermal plumes are visible to space within seconds. They are visible, specifically, to the Space-Based Infrared System, SBIRS, a constellation of geosynchronous and highly elliptical orbit satellites operated by the United States Space Force, with sensors sensitive enough to detect the heat bloom of a missile engine ignition within 3 to 4 seconds of first flame. The SBIRS data is processed at ground stations and retransmitted to the Ford Strike Group via the Wideband Global Satcom System, WGS, within 30 seconds of launch detection. But 30 seconds is almost academic here, because the Ford's own organic sensor network has already detected the launch independently. The AN/SPY-6 Vive-1 Air and Missile Defense Radar, AMDR, installed on the Strike Group's Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in Flight 3 configuration, is the most sensitive shipborne phased array radar ever deployed. It is described by Raytheon engineers as 35 times more sensitive than the SPY-1D system it replaces on some hulls, meaning it can detect and track a radar cross-section the size of a baseball at ranges that extend well beyond what any analyst was willing to quote publicly 5 years ago. The College Far's missile's solid fuel rocket plume, its ballistic trajectory arc, and its electronic emission signature are all acquired and tracked within the first 10 seconds of flight. The Aegis combat system aboard the escorting cruisers and destroyers doesn't wait for human confirmation. It has been operating in what naval doctrine calls auto-track mode, which means every detected launch is automatically classified, threat assessed, and queued for intercept by the combat system's fire control algorithms. A human officer reviews the engagement queue and either confirms or cancels within a 15-second window, but the system has already computed the intercept geometry, allocated interceptors from the vertical launch inventory, and positioned its guidance radars on the incoming threat tracks before the human decision is rendered. The first SM-3 Block 2A interceptor leaves its vertical launch cell in a column of rocket exhaust approximately 45 seconds after missile launch in Iran. The SM-3 doesn't chase the College Fars. It doesn't follow its flight path. Yet it uses predictive intercept geometry, the same mathematical principle that allows a quarterback to throw to where his receiver will be, not where he is, to calculate the precise point in three-dimensional space where the threat missile will be at a specific future moment, and fly to that point at Mach 15 in a straight line. The College Fars is climbing through 60,000 feet in its boost phase. The SM-3 is climbing through 40,000 feet, yet accelerating toward 150,000 feet where the intercept is computed to occur. Here is the physics that makes what happens next so absolute. At 150,000 feet, above 99% of Earth's atmosphere, there is effectively no air. No aerodynamic drag on the interceptor. No aerodynamic heating to interfere with the kinetic kill vehicle's infrared seeker. The SM-3's kinetic kill vehicle, KK-5, separates from the missile body at altitude and acquires the College Fars on its own infrared sensor. Yes, which can detect the heat differential between the Iranian missile's warm airframe and the cold background of deep space with extraordinary precision. The KKV masses approximately 30 kilograms. The College Fars at intercept altitude is still traveling at approximately 3 kilometers per second on its downward arc. The KKV is traveling at approximately 4.5 kilometers per second on its intercept vector. Combined closure velocity at the moment of impact is approximately 7.5 kilometers per second, or roughly Mach 22. Do the math on kinetic energy. 1/2 times 30 kilograms times 7,500 meters per second squared equals 843 million joules of energy delivered to a contact point approximately 30 centimeters in diameter. 843 million joules. A standard anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade delivers approximately 5,000 joules at detonation. The SM-3's kinetic impact delivers 168,600 times more energy than an RPG concentrated at a single point. At those energy levels, the concepts of bending, breaking, or shattering simply do not apply. The College Fars warhead, its guidance electronics, its fissile material, its airframe, none of it survives in any meaningful physical form. Solid metal undergoes instantaneous phase transition directly to superheated plasma at temperatures measured in the tens of thousands of degrees Kelvin. The debris field is a diffuse cloud of vaporized metal that disperses across an area of sky 200 meters wide and falls as microscopic particles no larger than dust. There is no warhead, there is no weapon, there is no threat. There is only physics applied with the precision of a geometry problem that was solved on a computer 30 seconds after the Iranian general gave his launch order. This is exoatmospheric intercept technology. We don't shoot down missiles. We delete them from existence using Newton's second law and the vacuum of near space as the kill zone. But the Iranian doctrine, as we established, doesn't rely on a single ballistic missile track. The salvo includes cruise missiles. The Noor and its more capable successor, the Kedr, are now inbound at wave-top altitude from coastal launch points, it having been fired simultaneously with the ballistic missiles to exploit what Iranian doctrine calls the defender's engagement layering seam, the theoretical window when the defensive system is committed to intercepting the high-altitude ballistic track and has temporarily reduced capacity to engage low-altitude simultaneous threats. This is the operational intelligence embedded in Iranian doctrine, and it is not wrong as a concept. Against a 1990s-era single-layer air defense system, it would represent a genuine vulnerability. Against the Ford Strike Group's Cooperative Engagement Capability, CEC, it represents a trap with no exit. The CEC is not a single weapon system. It is an architecture. It is a real-time data fusion and distribution network that links every radar, every sensor, every fire control system across every platform in the strike group, ships, aircraft, submarines, and space assets, into a single integrated operational picture updated continuously at data rates that make human comprehension of individual data streams impossible. Every SM-3 intercept of the ballistic tracks is being performed by one set of ships. Simultaneously, a completely separate set of fire control solutions is being developed and executed against the cruise missile tracks by the destroyer's SM-6 Standard missiles, which carry their own active radar seekers in terminal phase and therefore do not require continuous guidance illumination from the launching ship. This means the same destroyer can simultaneously guide multiple SM-6s against multiple low-altitude cruise missile tracks while the cruiser is executing SM-3 intercepts on ballistic tracks overhead, and neither engagement interferes with the other because the CEC has allocated radar resources, communication bandwidth, and fire control authority to each engagement without overlap or conflict. The human operators are reviewing, confirming, and monitoring. The machine is executing at machine speed. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, flying its battle management orbit at 25,000 feet, is the conductor of this orchestra. It's AN/APY-9. Ultra-high-frequency radar is tracking every airborne contact, ballistic, cruise, and UAV, simultaneously at ranges exceeding 300 miles. Its mission crew of 5 specialists are not fighting individual engagements. They are managing the entire battle space, allocating interceptors from the strike group's inventory to incoming threats, calculating remaining magazine depth in real time, and issuing engagement authority decisions that propagate instantaneously to every ship and aircraft in the formation. An Iranian UAV that has climbed to 200 feet altitude to avoid sea clutter radar masking is visible to the APY-9 at 200 miles. An SM-6 is allocated before the UAV reaches 150 miles. The intercept is executed at 100 miles. The UAV never reaches the carrier's outer defense zone. From the perspective of the Iranian operators who launched it, their drone simply disappeared from data link contact at a certain point and never reached its target. They don't see the intercept. They don't receive any transmission acknowledging their weapon was destroyed. The drone is simply gone, deleted from the operational picture by a weapon system they couldn't see, guided by a radar they didn't know had already acquired their asset when it was still on the launch ramp. But suppose the saturation volume is large enough that despite all of this, a single Noor cruise missile has survived to within 20 miles of the Ford. Its airframe is partially damaged from a proximity detonation of an SM-6 that achieved a near miss rather than a direct hit. And its guidance system is degraded but still functional, still flying its programmed terminal approach. This is the scenario that the IRGCN saturation doctrine is designed to create, one weapon through the outer layers, hoping for a catastrophic hit. This is where the innermost defensive ring engages, and it begins with the RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow Missile, ESSM Block 2. In a compact high maneuverability interceptor that operates at ranges from the ship surface out to 30 miles and can engage targets maneuvering at up to 50 G-forces, meaning it can track and kill a cruise missile performing evasive maneuvers that would generate enough G-force to destroy any aircraft with a human pilot. Inside 10 miles, the Phalanx Block 1B Close-In Weapon System, CYWS, it engages with its 20mm M61A, one rotary cannon firing at 4,500 rounds per minute in fully autonomous mode. Its own radar acquisition and fire control requiring zero human input and zero network connectivity to function. It is a standalone last-ditch system that has been described by Navy engineers as a guaranteed intercept if the weapon enters its engagement envelope. Inside 5 miles, and in this theater increasingly as a primary engagement option against slow-flying drones and fast inshore attack craft, the AN/SEQ-3 laser weapon system, LAWS, and its follow-on high-energy laser programs represent the final layer of the defensive architecture. The engagement cost of a directed energy weapon against a drone or cruise missile is measured in the electrical energy consumed per shot, which at current system power levels costs approximately $1 per engagement. $1. Hit against an Iranian drone that cost $20,000 to build. This isn't a weapons exchange. This is an economic execution. At this point in the analysis, the question that demands an answer is not tactical. It's moral and strategic. Why is the Ford here at all? Why is the United States placing $13.3 billion in hardware and 5,000 human beings inside a threat envelope that we've just described in exhaustive detail? In a body of water that Iran has specifically engineered its military doctrine to dominate? This is the question that deserves the most rigorous analysis in this entire discussion, because the answer is not about naval prestige or geopolitical posturing. It is, like everything else in naval operations, fundamentally a mathematics problem. The variables are time, distance, and human biology. In the FA-18EF, Super Hornet operating from the Ford's flight deck has a combat radius of approximately 450 nautical miles on internal fuel in a strike configuration carrying a full weapons load. That sounds like extraordinary reach. It is. But combat radius is not response time, and response time is the variable that costs lives when it is insufficient and saves lives when it is exactly right. A strike aircraft on the Ford's flight deck cannot launch the moment a ground force calls for close air support or a diplomatic convoy comes under attack on a road in the region. It requires 12 minutes minimum from scramble alert to catapult launch. The pilot must reach the aircraft, strap in, complete abbreviated systems checks. The aircraft must be positioned and connected to the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS. The airboss must clear the deck. And launch authorization must be transmitted and confirmed. That is 12 minutes of fixed overhead before the aircraft has moved 1 inch horizontally. Add flight time. At 140 nautical miles from potential target areas, an FA-18E reaches overhead at cruise speed in approximately 17 minutes. Total response time from scramble to overhead, 29 minutes. Now move the Ford to the edge of the Gulf of Oman, outside the Persian Gulf entirely. At 340 nautical miles from those same target areas, the 12-minute launch overhead remains constant, but flight time at cruise speed becomes 42 minutes. Total response time, 54 minutes. That 25-minute difference is not a tactical inconvenience. It is, under specific biological conditions, the difference between a living human being and a flag-draped casket. The biological condition is hemorrhagic shock progression in a combat casualty. A soldier, a sailor, a marine, or a diplomatic security officer takes a penetrating wound that severs the popliteal artery behind the knee, a wound pattern extremely common in improvised explosive device attacks and vehicle ambushes, which are the most statistically frequent life-threatening injury mechanisms in the current regional operating environment. The popliteal artery, when completely transected, bleeds at approximately 400 milliliters per minute. The average adult human body contains approximately 4.7 to 5.5 liters of blood. Hemorrhagic shock. Class 3, the threshold at which systemic organ perfusion begins failing, occurs at approximately 30 to 40% blood volume loss, which at 400 milliliters per minute means 15 to 25 minutes from wound to Class 3 shock. Class 4 shock, the threshold beyond which cardiac arrest becomes likely without immediate surgical intervention, occurs at 40% blood volume loss, approximately 20 to 25 minutes from wounding. After 40 minutes of uncontrolled hemorrhage, survival without surgical intervention approaches statistical impossibility regardless of how much blood product is transfused in the field. The number is not 60 minutes. The number for this injury mechanism is 40 minutes from wound to operating table. Not 45, not 35. Exactly 40. Now subtract the evacuation pipeline. JAUH 60M. Blackhawk or MV-22B. Osprey responding to a medevac call requires 14 minutes from alert to liftoff in a combat-configured state. Rotors spinning, flight medic aboard, trauma kit staged, navigation data loaded, landing zone coordinates confirmed, and airspace deconfliction cleared. 14 minutes of fixed overhead, subtracted from the 40-minute survival window, leaves 26 minutes of flight time. An Osprey cruises at 240 knots under normal conditions, but in a hostile threat environment requiring terrain masking and evasive routing, effective ground speed reduces to approximately 180 knots, which is 3 nautical miles per minute. 26 minutes at 3 nautical miles per minute yields a maximum medevac radius of 78 nautical miles. But that calculation assumes direct routing, perfect weather, immediate landing zone access, and no additional transfer time between the medevac aircraft and the ship's surgical suite. Combat provides none of those assumptions. Apply a 20% margin for operational friction, and the planning number for this injury mechanism is not 78 miles. The planning number is 62 nautical miles as the maximum safe medevac radius for a Class 4 hemorrhagic shock casualty. Not 70, not 55, exactly 62. The Ford's current operating position has been calculated against multiple such variables, layered and optimized simultaneously. Medevac radius for multiple injury mechanisms with different bleeding rates. Response time windows for different categories of air support request. The trade-off between closer proximity to threat systems and the defensive margin provided by the Aegis network. The geographic constraints of the Persian Gulf's navigable water. And the intelligence picture of where Iranian threats can be brought to bear most quickly. The convergence of those calculations produces a number. The ship is at that number. A 19-year-old hospital corpsman second class from Georgia, named in the Navy's personnel system only as Petty Officer R. Because this story is about a type, not an individual. And because hundreds of people matching this exact description are serving on carriers right now, has been on watch in the ship's trauma bay for 6 hours. He has rehearsed the popliteal artery tourniquet to surgical handoff protocol 340 times in simulation. His hands move with a precision that a civilian surgeon with 20 years of experience would respect. He doesn't know operational geography. He doesn't know the Aegis engagement sequence. He doesn't know the name of the Iranian general who authorized the missile launch that his ship's defensive systems defeated 2 hours ago while he was sleeping between watch rotations. What he knows is that when an Osprey lands on the flight deck and a stretcher comes through the trauma bay door, he has exactly 12 minutes to complete his assessment, establish 2 large-bore IVs, begin blood product resuscitation, and get the patient to the surgical team before the attending physician's pre-incision checklist runs out. He does his job in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The patient lives. That's why CVN-78 is at its current position. Not 10 miles closer to the Iranian coast. Not 10 miles further away. Exactly where the math requires her to be. Step back now from the individual engagement. Step back from the individual sailor. Pull the analytical lens to its maximum focal length until you can see the entire kill architecture simultaneously, because that is the only perspective from which the true nature of what the Ford brings to the Persian Gulf becomes comprehensible. What Iranian strategic analysts see when they study the Ford strike group is a carrier, her escort ships, and her air wing. They are analyzing the components. What they are failing to analyze is the emergent capability produced when those components are networked together at the speed of light into a single distributed combat organism. The carrier is the queen, but the board she's playing on belongs to the United States Navy. The Ford herself is the power generation and sustained operations core. Her two A-1B nuclear reactors produce an extraordinary amount of electrical power. The exact figure remains classified. But the Navy has stated publicly that the A-1B generates 3 times the electrical capacity of earlier Nimitz-class reactors. That power surplus is not an engineering luxury. It is a strategic enabler. It powers the EMALS, which has eliminated the mechanical energy limitations of steam catapults and allows the Ford to sustain higher sortie rates over longer periods with lower maintenance demands. It powers the Advanced Arresting Gear, AAG, which replaced the hydraulic arresting system. It powers the future directed energy weapon systems that the ship was specifically designed from the keel up to accommodate, weapons that require megawatts of continuous power to operate. The Ford isn't just a present-day system. She is a platform designed to operate weapons that don't exist in full production yet, making her relevant not for the next 5 years, but for the next 40. The Ticonderoga-class cruiser in the formation carries the Aegis Baseline 10 combat system, the most capable iteration of the architecture that has been the backbone of American naval air defense since the 1980s. Her AN/SPY-1D phased array radar is running continuous 360-degree air search. Her vertical launch system carries a mixed load of SM-2 standard missiles for medium-range air defense, SM-3 Block 1B and IIA for exo-atmospheric ballistic missile intercept, and SM-6 for extended-range engagements against aircraft, cruise missiles, and over-the-horizon surface targets. Yet the cruiser's BAT-to-CEC interface means her radar picture is shared instantaneously with every other platform in the formation, allowing any ship to engage a target acquired by any other ship's sensors. One radar sees it, everyone can shoot it. The Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyers in the screen carry the AMDR, giving them a threat detection capability against small, fast, maneuvering targets at ranges that have fundamentally changed the outer boundary of the formation's defensive zone. Should their AN/SQQ-89A V-15 integrated undersea warfare suite with hull-mounted sonar and towed array provides the anti-submarine warfare coverage that closes the underwater attack vector against which surface combatants have historically been most vulnerable. An Iranian Kilo-class submarine attempting to approach to torpedo launch range encounters a sonar net that detected it at distances measured in tens of miles, not in the few miles at which older hull-mounted sonars would have acquired it, and the Mk-54 lightweight torpedo and the RUM-139. Vertical Launch Anti-Submarine Rocket, VLAASROC, prosecute that contact from a ship that has never come within periscope range of the threat. The Virginia-class fast-attack submarine assigned to the strike group is the asset that Iranian planners have the most difficulty accounting for. She is, by design, invisible. Her acoustic signature at patrol speed is effectively indistinguishable from ocean background noise at detection ranges beyond approximately 2 miles. She has been on station in the operating area for weeks, mapping the acoustic environment, cataloging Iranian naval movements, collecting electronic intelligence on radar and communication systems, and programming her Tomahawk Block 5 land attack cruise missile, TLAM. Your inventory with GPS coordinates for every significant Iranian military facility and naval asset within her weapons range. If the decision is made to respond to an Iranian attack with strikes on origin points, those TLAMs leave their vertical launch tubes within 12 minutes of the order. They fly terrain-following profiles at 550 miles per hour. And the Iranian air defense network has essentially no capability to engage a Tomahawk that has been programmed with their radar frequencies and is flying a route designed by mission planners who know every radar coverage gap in the Iranian air defense architecture. The Iranian military facility that launched the Khalij Fars missiles at the Ford ceases to exist approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes after the launch. The submarine responsible is already repositioning to her next patrol area. She has never been detected. She will never appear in the engagement record. She is simply the consequence, delivering physics at addresses that were selected by a targeting process that was running before the Iranian general finished his launch order sentence. This is not a collection of warships. This is a distributed, networked, multi-domain combat system in which the removal of any single component degrades but does not defeat the whole, and in which the presence of all components creates a combined capability that exceeds the sum of its parts by a factor that has no historical precedent in naval warfare. Remove the Growler and the electronic deception layer collapses, but the kinetic intercept layers remain intact. Remove the cruiser's SM-3 capability, and the exo-atmospheric intercept layer degrades, but the inner layers compensate. Remove the submarine, and the deep strike deterrent is reduced, but the surface strike capability remains. The system is resilient by design, with redundancy built into every functional layer, because the engineers and tacticians who designed it understood that nothing in combat is certain, and that the only defense against uncertainty is depth. Remove enough pieces, and the structure eventually becomes vulnerable. But the architecture has been designed so that no realistic single strike can remove enough pieces to create a fatal gap. The cage is complete, the geometry is closed, and the animal that steps inside it does not step back out. Return now to 0340 hours in the Strait of Hormuz, to the IRGCN Operations Center in Bandar Abbas, where officers are watching their screens, to the Iranian strategic doctrine that has been 2 decades in development, to the confidence built on asymmetric cost calculations, saturation theory, and geographic advantage, to the general who believes the math favors him. Let him run his numbers one more time, with the complete picture in view. The Khalijfar's launches he is contemplating face a detection chain that begins in geosynchronous orbit and ends with a kinetic kill vehicle in near space. Should a chain that executes in 45 seconds and costs his targeting solution nothing, because the Growler has already rendered his firing solution mathematically fictional. The cruise missiles he believes will exploit the engagement seam between defensive layers face a sensor network operating at ranges his doctrine was never designed to account for, cued by a space-based constellation that doesn't sleep, managed by a battle management aircraft that can track 2,000 simultaneous contacts, and engaged by missiles with active seekers that require no continuous guidance from the launching ship and, therefore, impose no capacity limit on simultaneous engagements. The UAV swarms that represent the most economical saturation option face directed energy weapons that do not have magazines, do not have reload cycles, and do not have per-shot costs that favor the attacker in any economic scenario. Here, the submarine he might deploy faces an acoustic surveillance net so sensitive that its own hull noise detected it before it cleared Iranian territorial waters. And behind all of it, behind every interceptor and every sensor and every algorithm, is the human reality that no adversary's strategic doctrine has ever adequately modeled. The sustained performance of American sailors at the highest levels of their training over the longest possible operational periods. Should the 19-year-old corpsman from Georgia, who executes a hemorrhage control protocol in 11 minutes and 40 seconds because he has rehearsed it 340 times, the Growler electronic warfare officer managing 7 simultaneous deception tracks after 12 hours in the cockpit, the Aegis fire control technician who has been awake for 20 hours and still catches the anomalous radar return that the automatic system flagged as noise but that his pattern recognition, he built over 2,000 hours of watchstanding, identifies as a real threat at 80 miles. These people are not background characters. They are the system. They are the reason the numbers work. They are the reason the geometry closes. The hardware is extraordinary. The people operating it are more so. The Iranian general looking at his screen at 0340 hours is not making a tactical error. He is making a philosophical error. He is looking at a carrier and seeing a ship. He is not seeing the network. He is not seeing the spectrum. He is not seeing the acoustic picture that his submarine is generating for American passive sonar systems right now. He is not seeing the satellite that detected his launch crews performing pre-fire checks 3 hours ago and has been updating targeting packages for Virginia-class TLAMs ever since. He is not seeing the full picture, yet he is seeing the visible fraction of an architecture that was specifically designed to look like a ship while functioning as something fundamentally different. A multi-domain, networked, lethal trap that has pre-computed responses to every scenario in his doctrine manual and has the magazine depth, the intercept capacity, and the institutional will to execute those responses completely. The decision to challenge the Ford is not a military option. It is a physics experiment with a predetermined outcome. The variables are all on one side of the equation, and the equation resolves to the same answer regardless of how many times the Iranian general runs it. The Ford is not a target. She is a consequence delivery mechanism, and the consequence has already been calculated, pre-authorized, and loaded into vertical launch cells that have been pointed at the origin points of any possible Iranian attack since the day the strike group entered the Gulf. 3 days from now, when the diplomatic channels have quieted and the crisis has not escalated to the kinetic level, when the IRGCN officers in Bandar Abbas have watched their GPS-tracked assets move carefully away from engagement geometry with the strike group, yet when the Strait of Hormuz remains open to international shipping and the Iranian general has quietly filed his operational assessment without a recommendation to engage, that outcome will have no footage. No explosion visible from shore. No dramatic intercept visible to the press. The victory will be invisible because it will have been won in the electromagnetic spectrum, in the acoustic environment below the wave surface, and in the orbital mechanics of satellites that the Iranian radar operators never knew were watching them. The steel curtain held because it was never tested, and it was never tested because the Iranian general, somewhere in the second hour of running his numbers, arrived at the answer that every adversary eventually arrives at when they do the full calculation. The cost of initiating is not the cost of the weapons expended. The cost of initiating is the cost of everything that comes after. And everything that comes after, if you challenge the Ford, is the full weight of the most capable naval strike group in human history, freed from the constraints of de-escalation and operating under the most permissive rules of engagement that exist in the American military's authorization matrix. That is not a fight anyone can win. That is not a fight anyone survives intact. The geometry of the kill box has been solved. The intercept solutions are preloaded. The submarine is already at her launch waypoint. The Growler is already on station. The Hawkeye is already tracking. The watch has been stood for 6 hours, and it will be stood for 6 more. And 6 more after that, because the Ford doesn't sleep, the network doesn't sleep. And the sailors running it have decided that the words liberty risk and strategic deterrence are synonyms when you are the most powerful naval force ever assembled, and you are floating in the middle of a body of water that 8 different nations and 12% of global trade depend on staying open. This isn't a deterrent posture. This is a physics demonstration, and the audience has already drawn its conclusions. The line is drawn in the water. The formations are locked. The network is live. If Iran wants to verify the math, the Ford is exactly where she's always been. Not 1 mile closer to the threat. Not 1 mile further away. Exactly where the equations require her to be, with the watch set and the curtain down, and the answer already printed at the bottom of a page the Iranian general keeps reading but never quite finishes. The force is present. The variables are solved. The outcome was decided before the first radar swept. If this complete breakdown of why Iran challenging the USS Ford is a fatal strategic miscalculation changed the way you understand modern naval deterrence, type deterrence in the comments right now and tell us whether you think Iran has actually done the full calculation or whether they're still working with incomplete data. If you want the deep dive into how the Virginia-class submarine's role in a Persian Gulf contingency actually works, the acoustic stealth, the targeting pipeline, the TLAM employment doctrine, that analysis is the next piece of this puzzle. Subscribe so you're there when it drops. The network is always on. The watch continues. The physics don't negotiate.